The courtroom door opened with a soft creak at exactly 2:17 p.m. Just as my cousin Derek was explaining to Judge Patricia Morrison why I couldn't be present to contest his petition for adverse possession of my grandfather's 47-acre farm. Your Honor, as I've documented extensively, my cousin Michael has been living abroad for over 3 years, Derek said confidently, gesturing toward a folder of fabricated evidence on his attorney's table. He has shown no interest in maintaining the property or fulfilling his obligations as the legal owner. Under state law, my continuous occupation and improvement of the land for the past 3 years establishes clear grounds for adverse possession. Derek's attorney, Marcus Patterson, nodded approvingly as his client outlined the case for claiming ownership of property worth approximately $2.3 million. The judge appeared to be following Derek's presentation with appropriate attention, reviewing documents that supposedly proved my abandonment of the family farm that had been in our family for 4 generations. Neither Derek nor his attorney noticed me slip quietly into the back row of the courtroom, having flown in from my supposed permanent residence in London just that morning. I sat motionless, listening to Derek describe how he had, reluctantly, been forced to maintain the property after I had irresponsibly fled the country following my grandfather's death 2 years ago. His performance was impressive, the right mixture of family duty and legal justification that might have convinced a judge who hadn't reviewed the actual evidence. What Derek didn't know was that I had been quietly monitoring his activities from my temporary assignment in London, documenting every fraudulent claim he made about my absence and building a comprehensive case that would not only defeat his petition but expose him to potential criminal charges for fraud and perjury. As Derek concluded his presentation with a dramatic appeal about preserving family legacy, I stood up in the gallery. "Excuse me, Your Honor," I said in the clear voice that had served me well during 10 years of military service and 5 years of corporate leadership. "I'm Michael Harrison, the current legal owner of the property in question. I believe there have been some serious misrepresentations made to this court that require immediate correction." The color drained from Derek's face as he turned to see me walking toward the plaintiff's table. His attorney looked between us with obvious confusion, suddenly realizing that their entire case had been built on a foundation that had just collapsed. Judge Morrison looked intrigued rather than annoyed, apparently recognizing that this hearing was about to become far more interesting than a routine adverse possession claim. My name is Michael Harrison, 34 years old, senior project manager for Meridian International, a consulting firm that specializes in infrastructure development projects worldwide. My current assignment in London, which Derek had characterized as permanent abandonment, was actually a 2-year contract position that had been extended for an additional 12 months due to project success. Throughout my time abroad, I had maintained my U.S. residence, filed appropriate tax returns, and continued managing my domestic property investments, including the family farm that was now the subject of Derek's fraudulent legal challenge. The farm had been in our family since 1887, passed down through 4 generations of Harrisons who had worked the land, expanded its boundaries, and maintained its productivity through economic challenges and changing agricultural markets. My grandfather, William Harrison, had been the last full-time farmer in the family, gradually transitioning to leasing arrangements with local farmers while maintaining the property as a family legacy and investment asset. When grandfather William passed away 2 years ago, he left the farm to me in recognition of my childhood involvement in its operations and my demonstrated commitment to preserving family heritage. The inheritance had been clear, an uncontested 47 acres of prime agricultural land in Virginia's Shenandoah Valley, including the original farmhouse, 3 barns, and various outbuildings, with an appraised value of $2.3 million. Derek Harrison, my cousin and William's grandson, had expected to inherit the farm himself. As the only family member who had remained in the local area after college, Derek felt entitled to the property, despite his minimal involvement in its upkeep during Williams' later years. His disappointment about the inheritance terms had been apparent during the estate proceedings, though he had accepted the will's provisions without formal legal challenge at the time. My acceptance of the London assignment 6 months after inheriting. The farm had been carefully planned to maintain the property's value and productivity while advancing my career. I arranged for a local property management company to handle routine maintenance, continued the existing leasing arrangements with established farmers, and made several trips back to Virginia to oversee major repairs and improvements. The farm remained profitable and well-maintained. Throughout my absence, Derek had volunteered to keep an eye on things while I was overseas, a gesture I appreciated as family cooperation rather than recognizing as the first step in an elaborate scheme to steal my inheritance. I granted him a key to the farmhouse for emergency access and kept him informed about my travel schedule and property management arrangements. This trust, I later learned, had been a significant mistake. The first indication of problems came through my property management company, which reported that Derek had been interfering with maintenance contractors and demanding explanations about repair schedules and costs. When I contacted Derek directly, he claimed he was simply protecting family interests and ensuring the work was completed properly. His explanations seemed reasonable, though I noted an increasingly proprietary tone in his communications about our property. More concerning were reports from my leasing tenants that Derek had been making statements about transitioning the said property management arrangements and had asked detailed questions about lease terms and renewal schedules. When I confronted him about these conversations, Derek claimed he was simply trying to be helpful and denied any intention to interfere with established arrangements. The situation escalated when my property manager reported that Derek had changed locks on the farmhouse and was refusing to allow routine maintenance access. When I called Derek to demand an explanation, he claimed the lock change was for security purposes and that he was coordinating all property access to prevent confusion. This explanation was clearly false, as it directly contradicted the property management agreements I had established. At this point, I consulted with Patricia Williams, a Virginia attorney specializing in property law, to understand Derek's legal position and my options for addressing his interference. Patricia's assessment was direct and concerning. Based on what you're describing, your cousin appears to be attempting to establish adverse possession of your property, she explained. In Virginia, adverse possession requires continuous, open, and hostile occupation for a specific period. By interfering with your property management arrangements and claiming authority over the property, he may be trying to establish the legal groundwork for an eventual ownership claim. Patricia advised me to document all interactions with Derek, maintain clear records of my property management activities, and considered taking legal action to prevent further interference. She also recommended that I return to Virginia as soon as possible to reassert direct control over the property and prevent Derek from strengthening any adverse possession claims. However, my London project had reached a critical phase that required my continued presence for at least another 6 months. Rather than abandon my professional responsibilities, I decided to implement a comprehensive monitoring and documentation strategy that would allow me to track Derek's activities while building a strong legal case for defending my property rights. I engaged a private investigator, Thomas Chen, to conduct discreet surveillance of Derek's activities at the farm. Thomas documented that Derek had moved into the farmhouse, was presenting himself to neighbors as the new owner, and had begun making unauthorized modifications to the property. Most damaging was evidence that Derek was telling people I had abandoned the property and moved permanently to London. I also maintained detailed records of all property-related expenses, communications with tenants and contractors, and evidence of my continued involvement in farm management decisions. These records would be crucial for demonstrating that I had never abandoned the property despite my physical absence. The breakthrough came when Thomas discovered that Derek had consulted with an attorney about filing adverse possession claims. Through legal research, we learned that Derek was planning to argue that my 3-year absence constituted abandonment, and that his occupation of the property was therefore justified. His strategy depended on the court accepting his claim that I had no intention of returning to Virginia. Armed with this information, I worked with Patricia to develop a comprehensive defense strategy. We would document Derek's fraudulent claims, demonstrate my continued property ownership and management, and expose his scheme as an attempted theft of family property through legal manipulation. The most important element of our strategy was timing. Derek's adverse possession petition would likely be scheduled for a hearing during a period when he believed I couldn't attend due to my overseas assignment. By appearing unexpectedly at the hearing, I could not only present evidence contradicting his claims, but also demonstrate that his central premise, my permanent absence from the United States, was false. Patricia coordinated with the court to ensure I would be notified of any hearing dates, while I arranged with my London project manager to maintain flexibility for emergency travel if legal proceedings required my presence. The preparation was extensive, but necessary to protect property that represented both significant financial value and 4 generations of family heritage. The hearing had been scheduled for February 15th, with Derek's attorney filing motions claiming that my absence made normal notification procedures impossible. Patricia had received copies of all filings and kept me informed of Derek's legal strategy, which depended heavily on portraying me as having abandoned both the property and my U.S. residence. I flew back to Virginia on February 14th, landing at Dulles Airport at 6:30 a.m. and driving directly to the courthouse to review Derek's submitted evidence with Patricia. The documentation was extensive, but largely fabricated. Statements from neighbors claiming I had moved away permanently, utility records that supposedly showed property abandonment, and photographs that misrepresented normal maintenance activities as evidence of Derek's necessary occupation. Most importantly, Patricia had prepared comprehensive counter-evidence, records of my continued property management activities, documentation of my temporary work assignment rather than permanent relocation, financial records showing consistent investment in property maintenance and improvement, and witness statements from tenants and contractors confirming my ongoing involvement in farm operations. The hearing began at 2 p.m. with Derek's attorney presenting what appeared to be a straightforward adverse possession case. Marcus Patterson outlined the legal requirements for adverse possession, presented Derek's evidence of continuous occupation, and emphasized my supposed abandonment of the property. Derek's testimony was smooth and confident, painting himself as the responsible family member who had reluctantly assumed property management duties after I had fled to London. The judge asked appropriate questions about the evidence and seemed to be following the presentation with reasonable attention. Derek appeared increasingly confident as his attorney concluded their case, apparently believing that his scheme was succeeding exactly as planned. That's when I made my entrance, standing up in the gallery and identifying myself as the property owner. The immediate effect was dramatic. Derek's confident demeanor vanished. His attorney looked visibly confused, and Judge Morrison's expression shifted from routine attention to keen interest. "Mr. Harrison," Judge Morrison said after I had approached the plaintiff's table, "I was told you were unavailable to participate in these proceedings due to your residence abroad. Can you explain your presence here today?" I opened my briefcase and removed a folder containing my prepared statement and supporting documentation. "Your Honor, I've been working on a temporary assignment in London, not residing there permanently as Mr. Derek Harrison has claimed. I've maintained continuous ownership and management of the property in question throughout my absence. I believe the court has been presented with false information about both my whereabouts and my intentions regarding the property. The judge directed Derek's attorney to respond to my unexpected appearance, which Patterson attempted to do by claiming I was simply visiting temporarily and that my arrival didn't negate the evidence of abandonment. However, his argument was clearly undermined by the revelation that Derek's central claim about my permanent absence was false. Patricia then presented our comprehensive counter-evidence, systematically dismantling each element of Derek's case. She showed records of my continued property management activities, documented my temporary work assignment status, and presented evidence of Derek's fraudulent representations to neighbors and contractors. Most damaging was documentation proving that Derek had deliberately misrepresented my absence to support his adverse possession claims. The hearing continued for another 2 hours as Patricia presented witness testimony from property managers, tenants, and contractors who confirmed my continued involvement in farm operations. She also presented evidence that Derek had been telling people he owned the property and had made unauthorized changes to the farmhouse and grounds. Judge Morrison's questions became increasingly pointed as the evidence accumulated. She asked Derek directly about his statements to neighbors regarding his ownership of the property and his knowledge of my actual work status. Derek's responses were increasingly evasive and contradictory, clearly demonstrating that his adverse possession claims were based on deliberate deception rather than legitimate legal grounds. The judge's ruling was swift and decisive. Based on the evidence presented, it's clear that Mr. Michael Harrison has maintained continuous legal ownership and management of the property in question. Mr. Derek Harrison's claims of abandonment are not supported by the facts and appear to be based on deliberate misrepresentation of his cousin's circumstances and intentions. Judge Morrison denied Derek's adverse possession petition and ordered him to vacate the farmhouse within 30 days. She also indicated that the evidence of fraudulent claims might warrant further investigation by appropriate authorities, a warning that left Derek visibly shaken. The immediate aftermath of the hearing was awkward but satisfying. Derek avoided direct eye contact as he gathered his papers, while his attorney appeared embarrassed by the case's collapse. Patricia and I reviewed the judge's orders and began planning follow-up actions to ensure Derek complied with the eviction order and to address potential damages from his unauthorized occupation. Over the following weeks, Derek reluctantly vacated the farmhouse and returned keys to the property management company. He also faced potential civil liability for the unauthorized modifications he had made to the property, though I ultimately decided not to pursue damages in the interest of preserving family relationships. The experience taught me valuable lessons about trust, family dynamics, and the importance of maintaining clear legal boundaries, even with relatives. Derek's scheme had been sophisticated and might have succeeded if I hadn't been monitoring the situation carefully and maintaining proper documentation of my property management activities. 6 months later, I completed my London assignment and returned to Virginia permanently, taking a position with a domestic consulting firm that allowed me to remain closer to family property and responsibilities. The farm continues to be profitable and well-maintained, with Derek having learned an expensive lesson about the consequences of attempting to steal family property through legal manipulation. My cousin said I was abroad to claim my property. He didn't expect me at the hearing where his elaborate scheme would be exposed as fraudulent and his adverse possession claims would be decisively rejected. The surprise wasn't just my physical presence, but the comprehensive evidence I had gathered that demonstrated his deliberate deception and my continued commitment to protecting family legacy through proper legal channels. The most important outcome wasn't defeating Derek's legal challenge, but establishing clear boundaries, and accountability within our family that would prevent similar conflicts in the future. Today, managing the family farm from my permanent base in Virginia, I'm grateful for the experience that taught me to trust but verify, especially when family property and heritage are at stake.